A very warm welcome to esteemed listeners and learners. Today's lecture topic is Women, Reservation and the Indian State. Before we start with the lecture, it is important to understand the objectives behind the lecture. There are three important objectives of this lecture. Number one, to understand the politics behind Women's Reservation Bill in India. Why I'm mentioning the term politics behind Women's Reservation Bill? Because Women's Reservation Bill was introduced in the Parliament in 1996, but it is not passed yet. A long years of debates and discussion, but in spite of floodgates of debates and discussions, the bill is not passed yet. So, in the study of politics, the nature of politics and political process behind reservation should be understood. Number two, through this lecture, we are trying to understand the role of the Indian state. Why the role of the state becomes so important? Because it is the most important institution when it comes to the process of distribution of resources, legislation, and policy making. And number three, we are going to understand the nature of patriarchy working behind the state institutions. Why the bill is not passed yet? This question cannot be solved unless we understand the influence of patriarchy functioning in state institutions. Therefore, it is important to understand the nature of politics functioning behind the state institutions or political institutions. Before we start with the discussion on women, reservation and the Indian state, it is very important to understand the role of political parties in India, because the parliament, the state legislative assemblies are composed of political parties, representatives sent by the political parties. Unless we understand the nature of our political parties, the nature of politics working behind our political parties and the party system, our discussion on Women's Reservation Bill is incomplete. Before I start with the relationship between Reservation Bill and Indian state as well as political parties, it is important to understand that by Reservation Bill, we understand, or it is proposed, that 33% of seats should be reserved for women in state legislative assemblies and in the parliament. The bill is not passed yet because of the strong opposition by our political parties. Now the question is why political parties are opposing Women's Reservation Bill. There are several reasons behind it. National political parties like the BJP, the Congress, they have supported Women's Reservation Bill. But very surprisingly, political parties like leftist parties, RJD, Rashtriya Janata Dal, Samajwadi Party, Janata Dal United, all these parties have opposed Women's Reservation Bill because this reservation bill does not talk about caste-based reservation in parliament or state legislative assemblies. Therefore, these parties have said that this reservation is going to facilitate the interest of the cream and the elite section of women who are already privileged in our society. It is not only that, political parties have also said that women should come to power on the basis of their own merit. It is important to understand that political parties, either national or regional, they may support reservation bill, they may support Women's Reservation Bill in politics or in reality, but the real point is that in their election manifestos or in their agenda, women's question is hardly addressed. No political party is at all bothered about women's issues in their election manifestos. If we look at the internal composition of our political parties, then we will see that there are hardly women's members in political parties, especially in the top rank structure of the party. When it comes to the process of decision making, when it comes to the process of distributing resources, then political parties have remained masculine, political parties have remained very much male dominated. So this important nature of our political parties, especially the male-dominated patriarchal nature of political parties, is important to be understood. Unless we understand this nature, it is very difficult to understand that why the bill is not still passed in our parliament after struggle of so many years. It is also important to understand or explain that the relationship between political parties and women's movement in India is also very significant behind the politics of women's reservation. Women's movement is integral part of our society. The support for reservation bill has come from women's movement in India. But it is important to keep in mind that women's groups have shown mixed responses to the reservation bill. Many women's groups are there who have supported the bill and said that seats should be reserved in Parliament. But there are many women's groups who have not supported women's reservation bill. Why this conflict within the paradigm of women's movement in India? To understand this mixed response or the issue of conflict, we need to understand the relationship between women's movement and political parties in India. Better to say, the relationship between women's struggle and political parties in India. If we look at the trends of women's movement in India, then it is very easy to understand that there are basically two trends when it comes to the nature of women's organizations in India. There are many organizations which are independent and not at all related to political parties. Why? Because these women organizations believe that relation with the political parties may hamper or influence their ideological standpoint or their agenda. But there are many women's groups which are integrally related to political parties. For example, all our national parties like the Congress, the BJP, the leftist parties, they have their women's wings. But the point to be noted that there has been a close relation between women's groups and their policies and the ideologies of the political parties. When women's wings are related to political parties, then their ideologies cannot move beyond the ideology of the political party. Therefore, the leftist parties which are opposing women's reservation bill in Parliament definitely influencing the standpoints of women's groups, especially women's groups which are closely related to leftist parties. Therefore, it is important to understand the relationship between political parties and women's movement or women's mobilization in India. So, in terms of their organization, there are two trends. Number one, few are closely associated with political parties and few are independent. And that basically makes the difference when it comes to reservation bill in India, and it becomes very significant when it comes to the entire relationship between the Indian state, political parties and women's groups. Therefore, it is quite important to explain that women's reservation bill has remained a very conflicting as well as challenging topic in Indian politics. It is argued that this reservation is important to facilitate women's empowerment in politics. Unless women get control over resource distribution, over policy making, their empowerment, political as well as economic, will not be completed. Therefore, the democratic state has the responsibility to facilitate the question of reservation in reality, to materialize the policy in reality. But our discussion shows that there are different layers of politics functioning behind the question of reservation, behind the question which basically stands for women's power, women's control, women's political gains. It is also important to mention that the entire question of women's reservation bill has become more significant after 1993. Why I am mentioning this particular time, 1993? This period of 1992 and 1993 is very significant because it has created a landmark in Indian politics. Why? Because in 1993, 73rd and 74th amendments were passed. And what was this 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments? These constitutional amendments basically reserved 33% of seats for women in Panchayati Raj institutions as well as in municipal corporations. These amendments not only provided constitutional sanctity to the notion of local self-governments, but at the same time opened a floodgate or a new promise of empowerment, better to say political empowerment for women. This 33% of reservation in municipal corporation bodies and Panchayati Raj institution provided women with immense opportunity to come up in the public and participate in politics. It is important to mention that this 33% of reservation of seats in Panchayati Raj institutions and municipal corporations is very significant because it has nullified our long nurtured notion that women cannot perform as leaders. Rather, these constitutional amendments have created a new paradigm where women have emerged as leaders, women have emerged as political leaders, more specifically as councillors and Gram Pradhans. Through this lecture, it is also important to understand the stories of women, especially the stories of women leaders in India. Why? Because through this understanding, it is important for us to realize that if proper opportunities are given, then women can easily become leaders and serve the society, serve their community, serve their own interests. The most important thing, it serves in developing their capabilities and agency. Therefore, now I will try to explain the role of women leaders, especially the role of women pradhans in Gram Panchayat. Why am I mentioning the role of women pradhans in Gram Panchayats? Because there has been a distinction between women pradhans and women councillors. Obviously, those women who are functioning as leaders in cities, they are exposed to many facilities and many other opportunities. But the empowerment of rural women, especially in politics, is very significant because rural women have faced different types of problems, discriminations, and lack of rights in their everyday lives, and their exposure to politics and other institutions has always remained limited. That is why I'm trying to give more importance to the role of women pradhans or women leaders in rural areas rather than women leaders in urban areas. The Constitutional Amendment and Reservation Bill in Panchayati Raj institutions have shown that if seats are reserved for women, then it can really encourage them to come forward and participate in politics. 3 states have become very successful and interesting for our knowledge. Number 1, the example from West Bengal, 2, Rajasthan, and 3, Uttar Pradesh. In these 3 states, women leaders have emerged, especially in rural areas. Their roles have become very significant in Gram Panchayat and in Gram Sabhas. Why it is so? It is because the reservation has facilitated women to come to the public, and it has also given opportunity to women to present their perspective, to present their worldview in politics, to present their demands, to raise their voice in the public. Therefore, it has been seen through surveys that women leaders in Gram Panchayat, especially in states like West Bengal, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, have given more importance to the policies of investment in childcare, healthcare, and education, because women have given always importance to issues of care. It has also been seen that women's role is also very important in reducing the gender gap in education. Where women have been elected as leaders, in those constituencies, they have given more priorities to women's education, especially girls' education. It is also important to mention that women pradhans or leaders are more sensitive to the demands and problems of women. This is a problem when male leaders come into power. It is also important to look at the fact that women leaders also inspire other women to participate in politics, to participate in the meetings of Gram Sabha, to voice their demands. Therefore, whether it is the issues of drinking water, electricity, transport, women's participation has made the nature of politics more gender sensitive and inclusive. It has also been seen that women's participation in politics and their emergence as leaders in many areas have reduced the role of corruption. Therefore, it is important to keep in mind that women are emerging as leaders, and when they are emerging as leaders, they are trying to give more importance to the issues of daily survival of women, and that includes childcare, healthcare, education, etc. It also includes the issues of electricity, transport, and many other basic amenities. This discussion enables us to understand that if women are given proper opportunities, then they can emerge as successful leaders. But the question is it really so easy? Is this process of leadership beyond any challenges or criticisms? Our surveys say that in spite of their involvement in politics, in spite of their involvement and delivery of goods, many people are not satisfied with the performance of women's leaders in various rural areas. It is important to understand that the issue of women's leadership in our society is not free from various challenges, whether it is political leadership or economic leadership. It has been subjected to various challenges. Now, it is important to understand what are these challenges functioning behind women's political participation, their representation in political institutions, and their leadership. The first challenge comes from the nature of the society, the nature of patriarchy. Still, people do not have that attitude to accept women as leaders. Why so? Because the moment women are coming out and taking control of power and controlling resources, different type of issues in society, it challenges the distinction, the relationship between the public and the private. Still in our society, people are more used to look at women as the part of the home, as the part of the household. The moment they are coming out from the home, from household activities and exploring their capabilities, it is difficult for the society to accept them in their different roles. Therefore, the first challenge comes from the overall nature of patriarchal society, our different types of stereotypes and taboos. Women always have to fight against this overall nature of patriarchal society. Number 2, in spite of Reservation Bill, especially which was passed in 1993, the nature of our state institutions, especially bureaucracy, remains gender insensitive. Many male leaders are not habituated to accept women as their leaders. It also happens in other sectors. Many are still not habituated to accept women as their boss. Therefore, this insensitivity plays important role in making women more conscious about their attributes, about their roles in society. Number 3, women's issue of political leadership is also related to the question of proxy leadership. What is this proxy leadership? In many cases, women are closely attached with their families. Apart from this, other caste, religious identities, community identities play a very important role in influencing women's capabilities, leadership, and their decision-making process. Many political leaders and political theorists and political scientists, they have mentioned that as women are very much related to their families, their communities, and other identities, their decisions, their policies may be affected by their family members, by their other male members of family, or their communities. In that case, their capability and their credibility come into question. Therefore, it is important to understand that women's emergence as political leaders are not free from challenges, and these challenges not only stem from political institutions but also come from the very core of our society, family, and community. In conclusion, I will like to mention that Women's Reservation Bill and the promise of our democracy to ensure women's political participation in India has to finish a long journey, because this journey is not easy. The entire journey is all about gaining and losing control over decision making and resources. But at the end of the day, this reservation bill is going to empower women politically and economically. That is why it is taking long and incorporating multiple layers of debates and discussion.